Hello, I'm Vicky Roden and this is Fantasticalities. And are we ready for a deep dive? Because Fantasticalities is whimsy when it's had all its childhood museums closed down. But this is relevant to the piece of work that I am showing today, which is very much in the artwork tab on Fantasticalities shop, and it's called Hand of Glory in Absentia. Now, this was made as part of the More Than Human project that I worked on a few years ago, which was an Arts Council funded Developing Your Creative Practice project that was examining human remains in museum collections and how we relate to them in the modern day. The starting point of this was very much my childhood obsession with something in the Walsall Museum called the Hand of Glory, which was essentially a desiccated child's arm and shoulder blade that was reputedly found in the attic chimney of a local pub. Now, there is an absolutely magnificent article by a chap called George McFadden in the Black Countryman, which is the magazine of the Black Country Society. Absolutely recommend you check it out. It is beautifully researched. It is wonderfully it everything is there. Absolutely shows his sources. But I'm more interested right now in the mythology of the Hand of Glory in Walsall. So, like I said, this was a child's arm that was found bricked up in the chimney of the White Hart pub in Carmer in Walsall, which was literally round the corner from where I lived. My parents basically knew that if we went to Walsall Museum, they could leave me in front of the Hand of Glory, go off shopping for an hour, and I'd still be there going, but the fingernails are so perfect, when they got back. So, allegedly found in 1870, I personally have spent a lot of time going through newspaper archives and found nothing. The article by George McFadden very much discusses that. But it was allegedly found with a Cromwellian sword. And the White Hart itself is a really interesting building. It's probably one of the oldest buildings in Walsall. There's been a house on the site since 14th, 15th century. Queen Elizabeth I allegedly spent a night there. There was apparently a tunnel between the pub and the church on the top of the hill, which was used by grave robbers, which again makes the apparent discovery of a severed arm in the building quite interesting. Another fun fact, whereas in Scotland, grave robbers were known as resurrectionists, in the Black Country we call them the dig-em-uppers. Well, there's a fantastic tale of the Tipton Slasher taking one of them on, but that's another tale for another time. So, when I was a kid, I used to love Walsall Museum, and this particular object was my favourite. Big kudos to the junior school teachers who managed to direct me away from the human remains and getting all of my friends to see them when we were supposed to be on a trip to the art gallery, because at that time they were facing each other. But one of the things that I've always loved that object, and for me human remains in museum collections are something that should be given honour. I mean, celebrated is a difficult term given the way that a lot of these individuals came to be in that situation. But from my perspective as someone from a working class background, a lot of these individuals were either working class or victims of colonialism. And so chances are this child is likely to have been working class and died young. And if their parents weren't able to afford to pay for a funeral for them, chances are they would end up being dissected by the local medical school. So this is a piece of embroidery because I was lucky enough to be able to spend some time in the Walsall Museum archives getting reference photographs, measuring and so on. I've not been able to work with them in respect of making anything with the arm themselves. Uh, Unfortunately, Walsall Council doesn't particularly value its museum services, and in 2015, Walsall Museum closed down temporarily. Um, it's now an interesting situation in respect of Walsall Leather Museum, which is a 40-year-old established museum in a former leather works, and the council are also looking to move that to another location and theoretically reopen Walsall Museum as a whole. If you have a look on my Instagram or on my Facebook pages, you will see the general furore that's going on with that. But when I made this piece of work, I very much wanted it to represent Walsall. I wanted it to represent the legend of the Hand of Glory. So there is the embroidery itself, which is silk, gold thread, pearls, precious beads, Roman beads, on a ground that's actually recycled from the sleeve of a jacket. So it's an arm on an arm. The copper tray, it relates to the actual object that the teachers managed to get me to focus on that trip, which is a copper mitre that's currently in the Garman Ryan collection, and it is beautiful. But it has that same kind of settings for the stones on that. The actual antlers that the tray rests on relates to the fact that it was found allegedly in the White Hart. And the bindings are leather and copper, and that relates back to Walsall's historic leather industry. So when this was actually exhibited at New Art Gallery Walsall as part of their Pride and Privilege exhibition, which looked at the notion of social class within the collection. And during install, Julie Brown, who is an amazing curator, actually discovered this, I don't know if you can quite see that, but this 2015 penny, which represents the day that the museum closed, and so this individual was no longer on public display and was no longer accessible by the people of Walsall. And so in order to celebrate that, I also picked up this 1870 penny, which is the point at which this object's tale really began, at least in popular mythology in the town. The first time it was actually recorded as being shown publicly was somewhere in the 1920s as part of a schools week. But I very much feel that the Hand of Glory it's basically an ancestor of Walsall, and I really hope at some point to be able to make some work for it and be able to actually show it the credence it deserves. Because when you encounter human remains in museums, you're not just seeing a representation of a person or what a life was like. You're encountering an actual human. You're encountering somebody who loved, who hated, who stubbed their toe, who threw balls, who held hands. And for whatever reason, they ended up becoming essentially a medical exhibit, and they are still as valid and relevant, and it's important to actually acknowledge that these individuals are people. So this piece of work, it obviously includes the embroidery on the stand, and it includes these two coins. If it's exhibited further, then my plan is to actually add a coin for each exhibition that is part of. But right now you are looking at the embroidery stand and the date story started in popular culture, and the date story ended in respect of being publicly accessible. So, tatty bye, my lovelies, and see you soon.